Everyone in the boardroom thought she lost. The silence fooled them. 14 days later, the company collapsed, and only then did they understand who really held the power. The room decided she was finished before she even sat down. The termination came before her name fully left his mouth. The glass-walled boardroom at North Glass Systems was too clean, too bright, the kind of space designed to make power look permanent. Morning light spilled across the polished table, refracting through water glasses and untouched notepads. Every seat was filled. Directors' advisors, legal finance, all of them waiting for a performance they believed would be brief and bloodless. Ethan Crowell stood at the head of the table, posture precise, jaw set in the practiced confidence of a man newly promoted and eager to prove that authority fit him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Effective immediately," he said, fingers resting on a slim folder. "Lena Moore is relieved of her duties." The folder snapped shut sharp final. For a fraction of a second, the room froze. Pens hovered to him. A projector hummed, forgotten. Someone inhaled and forgot to exhale. Lena Moore did not move. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, spine straight, eyes calm. No shock, registered on her face, no protest, no tightening of the jaw. Those who watched closely might have mistaken her stillness for surrender. Those who knew her work understood something else entirely. 6 years. 6 years of building the algorithmic spine of North Glass Systems. Of nights spent rewriting routing logic while executives slept. Of quietly intercepting bad decisions before they reached the engineers. Of absorbing pressure so her team could think clearly. The company's celebrated artificial intelligence platform did not breathe without her. It never had. But Ethan Kroll had not built any of that. His resume was immaculate. Strategy decks, consulting triumphs, leadership language polished until it gleamed. He spoke in frameworks and futures, in phrases that sounded decisive while meaning very little. To him, Lena was an inefficiency, a relic, a name that did not belong on the new org chart he envisioned. He did not look at her as he spoke. He looked past her, already imagining the next slide, the next headline, the next applause. "Security will revoke access by end of day," Ethan continued. "Human resources will coordinate the transition." Transition. The word landed softly and erased everything. A murmur rippled through the room, controlled, contained. The kind of reaction people had when they sensed a mistake, but lacked the courage to name it. A director shifted uncomfortably. The head of engineering stared down at the table. Someone from finance swallowed hard. Lena rose slowly. The movement drew every eye. Ethan paused, irritation flickering across his face. He expected anger, he expected pleading, he expected noise. She gave him none of it. She gathered her notebook, smoothed the edge with deliberate care, then lifted her gaze. Her eyes passed over the room, meeting each face in turn, not accusatory, not desperate, simply present. When she spoke, her voice was soft enough to force the room to listen. Understood. One word, calm, clean. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. Ethan blinked. Just once. A flicker of confusion he masked quickly, mistaking composure for defeat. He nodded, satisfied, already filing the moment away as proof of his decisiveness. Lena turned and walked toward the glass doors. As she did, thoughts moved through the room like aftershocks. The chief legal officer wondered, briefly, whether all intellectual property documentation had been reviewed carefully enough. The operations director felt a pulse of unease she could not explain. An engineer at the far end clenched his jaw, suddenly unsure who was protecting them now. Lena felt all of it. She felt the weight of eyes on her back. She felt the unspoken question hanging in the air. How could someone so essential leave so quietly? Because she had prepared for this. In the hallway, away from the glass and the polished certainty, her calm fractured just enough to let something sharper through. Not fear, not grief, clarity. Ethan Crowell believed power lived at the head of the table, in titles, in votes, in the ability to end a career with a sentence. What he did not know was that the foundation of North Glass Systems did not belong to the boardroom. It belonged to the architecture, and the architecture belonged to her. As the elevator doors slid shut, Lena exhaled for the first time since the meeting began. The building continued humming around her, unaware that something vital had just been severed. They thought they had removed a problem. They had no idea they had activated a consequence. By nightfall, her access was already gone. The system erased her faster than it had ever acknowledged her. Lena stood on the sidewalk across from the North Glass Tower, the building still glowing with after-hours ambition. Floors of light stacked neatly into the sky, each one humming with motion she could no longer touch. Her phone vibrated once in her palm, then again, then again. Messages arrived without ceremony. A senior engineer asked whether they were allowed to keep deploying builds. Another wanted to know if the roadmap was still valid. Someone else, usually cynical to the point of indifference, wrote only 3 words: "So we are disposable." Inside the building, people were scrambling. Outside, Lena felt something hollow open in her chest. For years, she had been the quiet buffer between chaos and clarity. When leadership argued, she translated. When timelines collapsed, she rebuilt them. When pressure mounted, she absorbed it and let her team breathe. Now the buffer was gone, and the impact was immediate. In an open-plan office 3 floors below the boardroom, a junior developer stared at a frozen dashboard and wondered who would sign off on his work. In a glass corner office, a director reread the termination notice and felt the first prickle of unease. In the executive suite, Ethan Crowell loosened his tie and told himself this was progress. Lena walked home. Her apartment was small, quiet, and dim in the way spaces become when they are no longer shared. She dropped her bag by the door and stood still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the ordinary noises of a life abruptly simplified. She checked her phone again. More messages. More uncertainty. She typed responses she never sent, reassurances she could no longer guarantee. Each unsent word tightened the knot behind her ribs. Guilt crept in, unwelcome and sharp. Had she stayed silent too long? Had her composure in that boardroom told them she accepted this? Had she failed the people she spent years protecting? The doubt came quietly, wearing familiar clothes. Maybe they were right to let her go. Maybe leadership was transferable, replaceable, cosmetic. Maybe all those nights she stayed awake rewriting logic and shielding her team had only delayed the inevitable. The thought settled heavy, pressing down on her chest. Across the city, Ethan Crowell stood before a wall of glass, watching his reflection multiply in the dark. He told himself the system would adjust. It always did. People resisted change, then adapted. The engineers would fall in line. The platform would move forward without the friction of someone who questioned too much. He poured a drink and rehearsed tomorrow's talking points in his head. Back in her apartment, Lena sat on the edge of the couch and let the silence stretch. It was the kind of silence that invites memories. Long nights in windowless labs, whiteboards covered in half-erased equations, a team laughing at 2 a.m. because exhaustion made everything funny. She had built something real. She knew that. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message was shorter. Casual. Almost careless. Do they know who controls the routing core? She stared at the words. Her breath caught. The sender was an intern. Someone who was never meant to see beyond bug queues and test cases. Someone who should not have been anywhere near that knowledge. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Of course he had noticed. He had been there during the audit review. Quiet, observant. Watching her flag documents no one else bothered to read. Watching her insist on clauses that felt unnecessary to people who did not understand leverage. The doubt loosened its grip. The system had not erased her. It had only hidden what mattered. Lena set her phone down and closed her eyes. The weight in her chest shifted, reshaping itself into something steadier. Not triumph, not relief. Awareness. In conference rooms across the city, people were still speaking her name in past tense. They thought they had removed a function. They did not yet realize they had destabilized the foundation. Tomorrow the questions would grow louder. The confusion sharper. The cracks more visible. Tonight, Lena sat alone with the knowledge they did not have, and for the first time since the boardroom doors closed behind her, she did not feel finished. The message arrived without warning, without urgency, without fear. That was what made it dangerous. Lena was standing at the kitchen sink, staring at nothing, when her phone vibrated once on the counter. No cascade of alerts, no frantic punctuation, just a single line that should not have existed. Do they know who actually controls the routing core? She did not breathe for a moment. The room seemed to narrow, sound draining away, until all she could hear was the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint rush of blood in her ears. Her eyes locked on the screen. She read the sentence again, slower this time, as if the meaning might change. It did not. The sender was an intern, not someone from legal, not a senior engineer, not anyone who sat in rooms where leverage was discussed out loud. An intern, young, quiet, observant, the kind of presence executives forgot the moment they stopped speaking. That was when the first crack appeared. Across the city, in a brightly lit operations room, engineers were still trying to untangle permissions that no longer made sense. Access requests stalled, deployments hung, questions floated upward and found no one waiting to catch them. A manager rubbed his temples, unsettled by how quickly uncertainty had spread. In a glass office overlooking the skyline, the newly crowned chief executive told himself this turbulence was temporary. Systems resisted change. People resisted it more. He trusted momentum. He trusted authority. He trusted that whatever he could not see could not hurt him. He did not know the foundation had shifted. Back in her apartment, Lena picked up the phone and sat down slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter the fragile clarity forming in her mind. She closed her eyes, not to escape the moment, but to return to it. The audit. 2 years earlier, during a budget contraction disguised as a realignment, leadership had demanded efficiency. Fewer redundancies, cleaner ownership, faster approvals. Lena had listened carefully, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that sounded procedural. And then she had done something else entirely. She had protected the system by removing it from their reach. Not dramatically, not defiantly, quietly, through language, through clauses that looked dull enough to bore anyone who did not understand consequence. She had routed the core logic through a separate entity, structured to preserve continuity in the event of disrupted oversight. At the time, they had praised her caution without reading the fine print. The intern had been there. He had sat against the wall during those meetings, laptop balanced on his knees, assigned to document changes no one else wanted to track. He had watched her slow the conversation when executives grew impatient. He had noticed when she insisted on wording revisions others waved away. He had seen the architecture where they saw bureaucracy. Lena opened her eyes. The doubt that had haunted her since the boardroom began to loosen its grip. Not because she felt vindicated, but because she finally understood the shape of what had been taken and what had not. They had removed her title. They had severed her access. They had erased her presence from the org chart. They had not taken the system. In the North Glass Tower, confusion deepened. A director asked legal for confirmation on licensing authority. Legal asked operations. Operations asked engineering. Engineering asked who was allowed to answer. No one knew. The absence was no longer theoretical. It was structural. Lena stood and crossed the apartment, opening a drawer she had not touched in months. Inside were folders, old contracts, printed emails, notes scribbled during meetings that ended long after midnight. She did not open them yet. She did not need to. The message from the intern had done something far more valuable than provide information. It had confirmed a truth. The system knew who built it. And systems, when designed well, are loyal to structure, not hierarchy. She typed a response, then deleted it. The intern did not need reassurance. He already understood more than he should have. Instead, she set the phone down and leaned back against the counter, letting the weight of the moment settle away. Outside, traffic moved as it always did. Inside, something had realigned. They thought she was isolated. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought power announced itself loudly and lived in corner offices. Tomorrow, they would discover how wrong they were. For now, Lena allowed herself a single, quiet breath. Not of relief, of recognition. She was no longer reacting. She was holding the thread they did not know existed. The email should have stayed buried. Instead, it waited for her like a trapdoor beneath memory. Lena pulled the first box from the closet just after midnight, dust lifting into the air as cardboard scraped against wood. The apartment felt smaller at night, walls closing in as if listening in. Outside, the city moved without her. Inside, time folded back on itself. She had told herself she would sleep. She had told herself tomorrow would be soon enough. But the message from the intern had torn something open, and now stillness was impossible. She spread the contents across the kitchen table. Contracts, old binders, printed emails with margins filled in by her handwriting, coffee rings marked pages she remembered too well. Each document carried a fragment of pressure, a decision made when no one else wanted to decide. This was not nostalgia. This was evidence. Across town, a different table held a very different mood. In the executive suite, voices rose and fell behind closed doors. Someone asked why deployment keys were timing out. Someone else insisted it was a configuration lag. The chief executive waved it off with practiced confidence. He had already dismissed the only person who ever worried about edge cases this deeply. He believed that meant the problem was gone. Back in the apartment, Lena moved slowly, deliberately, as though speed might break the fragile thread she was following. She opened a thin folder labeled with a date from 2 years earlier. The year budgets tightened, the year leadership demanded simplification, the year she had stopped trusting verbal assurances. She remembered that night clearly. Finance had called it a realignment, translation delivered in careful tones, funding would be streamlined, oversight consolidated, redundancies eliminated. Everyone nodded. No one asked what happened if continuity failed. She had asked. Her question had been met with impatience, then smiles. Of course, continuity would not fail. Leadership was stable. The structure was sound. So she had written it anyway. Her finger traced the printed page now. Following lines she could recite from memory. Language dry enough to lull anyone skimming. Clauses nested inside clauses. Words chosen not for drama, but for precision. In the event of disrupted oversight or termination of architectural authority, core operational control reverts to the original architect until formal reintegration is executed. She stopped breathing. There it was, plain, unassuming, devastating. Her termination had not removed her authority. It had activated it. The realization landed not as triumph, but as gravity. Heavy, certain, unavoidable. Lena sank into the chair, the wood cold beneath her palms. For a long moment she did not move. The apartment hummed softly around her, the refrigerator cycling, the city murmuring beyond the windows. They had never seen this coming. They had been too busy measuring power by proximity to the table, by who spoke last, by whose name appeared on the slide. They had mistaken silence for absence. Preparation for compliance. Across the city, the operations director stared at a permissions report that refused to reconcile. Legal drafted an email asking for clarification they could not quite phrase. Engineers waited for instructions that did not arrive. Confusion was no longer contained. It was spreading. Lena gathered the papers into a neat stack. Her hands were steady now. The doubt that had gnawed at her since the boardroom had receded, replaced by something colder and more durable. Resolve. She stood and walked to the window, city lights reflecting back at her. Somewhere in one of those towers, people were still congratulating themselves for decisive leadership. Somewhere else, someone was about to realize the system no longer answered to them. She did not smile. This was not revenge. Revenge required emotion. This was consequence, built patiently, triggered automatically. She returned to the table and slid the folder back into place, marking it with a simple note. She would need it soon. Not to threaten, not to bargain, to remind them of what they had signed without reading. The night stretched on, but Lena felt no fatigue, only focus. The kind that comes when the noise falls away and the shape of things becomes clear. They thought they had locked her out. In truth, they had handed her the keys. The screen froze in front of everyone who mattered. Not slowly, not gracefully. It simply stopped breathing. The auditorium at North Glass filled with the low murmur of confidence before the failure, the sound executives make when they believe the future is already sold. Investors sat in clean rows, jackets pressed, expectations sharpened by months of promises. The stage lights burned white against glass and steel. This was supposed to be the moment everything locked into place. The demonstration began smoothly. Charts flowed, dashboards bloomed with color. Applause flickered at the edges of the room. Then the system blinked. Once, twice, and collapsed into a single sterile line of text that no amount of confidence could reinterpret. Authorization invalid. For half a second, no one reacted. Silence stretched, thin and brittle. A few people leaned forward, assuming it was a delay. A glitch. Something ordinary. At the back of the room, an engineer's fingers hovered above a keyboard, then froze. His pulse kicked hard against his throat. He refreshed the interface. The message did not change. On stage, the chief executive laughed too quickly. He raised a hand, smiling wide, voice smooth and reassuring. Just a brief hiccup. He said 2 minutes. Nothing unusual. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. The murmurs thickened. Investors glanced at one another. Someone checked a watch. A woman in the second row frowned, pen pausing mid-note. She had seen this before, the way certainty unraveled when no one knew who was actually in control. In the operations room 3 floors below, panic began to spread like heat. Access requests failed. Overrides returned nothing. Engineers spoke faster, then louder, then not at all. One whispered the question no one wanted to ask: who has the keys? Across the city, in a quiet apartment far removed from polished glass and spotlights, Lena watched the updates arrive one line at a time. She did not sit forward. She did not hold her breath. She leaned back in her chair, the hum of her laptop the only sound in the room. The message appeared in a private channel she had never been removed from. They are stuck. Another followed. Staging is locked. Production is not responding. A third, slower, heavier. No one can authorize anything. Lena closed her eyes. She saw the boardroom again. The folder snapping shut, the word understood hanging in the air like a misunderstanding. She felt none of that now. Only a steady, quiet confirmation. The system was behaving exactly as designed. Back in the auditorium, the chief executive's smile began to fracture. He tugged at his cuff, cleared his throat, waved toward the engineering team as if proximity could restore authority. He spoke again, louder this time, promising redundancies, safeguards, solutions that did not exist. A voice rose from the crowd, calm, precise. Are we saying we do not control our own platform? The question cut cleanly through the room. Heads turned in unison. The air shifted. Confidence drained from faces that had purchased certainty an hour earlier. The chief executive hesitated, just long enough to betray himself. Of course we do, he said too fast. Everything is under control. But control does not need to insist on itself. Downstairs, a senior engineer stared at a permissions log that ended in a name no longer on payroll. His hands shook as he realized the architecture had chosen its allegiance long before this moment. In her apartment, Lena opened her eyes. This was not victory. It was inevitability. She did not celebrate. She did not message anyone. She folded her arms and breathed, letting the weight of years settle into a single point of clarity. They had believed her power ended when her badge stopped working. They had believed access was authority. They had believed the loudest voice in the room was the one the system listened to. On stage, the chief executive stood under unforgiving lights, sweat gathering beneath his collar as questions multiplied faster than answers. He felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not fear exposure. The platform did not recognize him. The applause that had been promised never came. Investors began to stand. Conversations broke apart into smaller, sharper exchanges. The future, once so confidently displayed, now flickered uncertainly behind a frozen screen. Miles away, Lena closed her laptop. The room around her was quiet, ordinary, no glass walls, no audience. And yet, for the first time since she was dismissed, she felt fully present. They thought firing her had ended the story. In truth, it had finally allowed the system to speak. The phone rang the next morning, and the name on the screen told her everything. They were no longer confident enough to stay silent. Lena watched the device vibrate on the table, its insistence breaking the stillness of her apartment. The city outside was already awake, rushing forward as if nothing had cracked beneath it. She let the call ring longer than necessary, not to punish them, to steady herself. When she answered, the voice on the other end was polished and careful, wrapped in practiced warmth. They said her name gently, asked how she was holding up, expressed concern in tones rehearsed to sound human. Concern arrived late. As the words spilled out, Lena listened without interruption. She heard the strain hiding beneath the courtesy, the subtle urgency dressed up as professionalism, the way sentences curved away from responsibility. They spoke of challenges, of unexpected disruptions, of the need for continuity. They spoke as if the last few days had been weather, as if her dismissal had been a misunderstanding, not a decision executed with precision. Then the offer came. They would like her to return immediately. Access would be restored, her role reconsidered, compensation adjusted, titles, resources, authority. Everything she had been stripped of could be handed back if she agreed to step inside the building again. On the other end of the line, the speaker waited, breath held just slightly too long. Somewhere nearby, someone else was listening. Perhaps more than one. Someone. Lena pictured the scene without effort. A conference room with the blinds half drawn, executives leaning forward, legal watching closely. The chief executive pacing, pretending not to care. She pictured the relief they expected to feel when she said yes. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the old instincts stirred. The part of her trained to stabilize systems, to absorb chaos, to fix what others broke and call it leadership. That instinct had kept her awake for years. It had made her valuable. It had made her invisible. She let it pass. When she spoke, her voice was even calm. Unemotional. You want me back. The confirmation came too quickly. Yes, absolutely. The team respects her. The investors are unsettled. Stability matters now more than ever. Stability. A word used when control is slipping. They began outlining numbers. Increased compensation, performance incentives, long-term alignment. Every figure offered like a bridge back to familiarity. Lena listened, then interrupted gently. You do not have enough money. Silence rushed into the line, heavy and unprepared. She continued, not raising her voice, not sharpening it. You do not have enough money to buy back the years I spent protecting a system you did not understand. Not enough to purchase the nights I stayed awake so your decisions would not break it, and certainly not enough to buy my silence. On the other end, breath quickened. Papers shifted. Someone whispered something she could not hear. They tried again, softer this time, appealing to loyalty, to legacy, to the idea that she belonged there. That was when she understood how deeply they had misread her. Belonging was never the currency. Ownership was. She thanked them for the call. Then she ended it. No argument, no escalation, just a clean break. The phone went quiet in her hand. The apartment returned to its ordinary sounds. Somewhere far away, voices rose in confusion as the line went dead. In a glass office across the city, the chief executive stopped pacing. His confidence faltered, just briefly. He stared at the silent phone as if it had betrayed him. For the first time since the demo collapsed, something close to fear surfaced. They had assumed leverage still flowed one way. They were wrong. Lena set the phone down and stood by the window. Below, people hurried through their routines, unaware of the negotiations that had just failed. She felt no rush of triumph, only a settling calm. She had not refused them out of anger. She had refused because returning would mean pretending the truth could be undone. Power did not live in access badges or boardroom chairs. It lived in the ability to say no when the price was not worth the cost. They had believed firing her ended her relevance. Instead, it clarified it. Lena turned away from the window, already thinking ahead. They would not stop here. Desperation had a way of widening the field. And somewhere beyond the reach of apology and salary adjustments, another conversation was waiting to begin. The phone rang the next morning, and the name on the screen told her everything. They were no longer confident enough to stay silent. Lena watched the device vibrate on the table, its insistence breaking the stillness of her apartment. The city outside was already awake, rushing forward as if nothing had cracked beneath it. She let the call ring longer than necessary, not to punish them, to steady herself. When she answered, the voice on the other end was polished and careful, wrapped in practiced warmth. They said her name gently, asked how she was holding up, expressed concern in tones rehearsed to sound human. Concern arrived late. As the words spilled out, Lena listened without interruption. She heard the strain hiding beneath the courtesy, the subtle urgency dressed up as professionalism, the way sentences curved away from responsibility. They spoke of challenges of unexpected disruptions, of the need for continuity. They spoke as if the last few days had been weather, as if her dismissal had been a misunderstanding, not a decision executed with precision. Then the offer came. They would like her to return immediately. Access would be restored. Her role reconsidered. Compensation adjusted. Titles, resources, authority. Everything she had been stripped of could be handed back if she agreed to step inside the building again. On the other end of the line, the speaker waited, breath held just slightly too long. Somewhere nearby, someone else was listening. Perhaps more than one someone. Lena pictured the scene without effort. A conference room with the blinds half drawn. Executives leaning forward, legal watching closely. The chief executive pacing, pretending not to care. She pictured the relief they expected to feel when she said yes. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the old instinct stirred, the part of her trained to stabilize systems, to absorb chaos, to fix what others broke and call it leadership. That instinct had kept her awake for years. It had made her valuable. It had made her invisible. She let it pass. When she spoke, her voice was even calm, unemotional. You want me back? The confirmation came too quickly. Yes, absolutely. The team respects her. The investors are unsettled. Stability matters now more than ever. Stability, a word used when control is slipping. They began outlining numbers. Increased compensation, performance incentives, long-term alignment, every figure offered like a bridge back to familiarity. Lena listened, then interrupted gently. You do not have enough money. Silence rushed into the line, heavy and unprepared. She continued, not raising her voice, not sharpening it. You do not have enough money to buy back the years I spent protecting a system you did not understand. Not enough to purchase the nights I stayed awake so your decisions would not break it. And certainly not enough to buy my silence. On the other end, breath quickened. Paper shifted. Someone whispered something she could not hear. They tried again, softer this time, appealing to loyalty, to legacy, to the idea that she belonged there. That was when she understood how deeply they had misread her. Belonging was never the currency, ownership was. She thanked them for the call. Then she ended it. No argument, no escalation, just a clean break. The phone went quiet in her hand. The apartment returned to its ordinary sounds. Somewhere far away, voices rose in confusion as the line went dead. In a glass office across the city, the chief executive stopped pacing. His confidence faltered. Just briefly, he stared at the silent phone as if it had betrayed him. For the first time since the demo collapsed, something close to fear surfaced. They had assumed leverage still flowed one way. They were wrong. Lena set the phone down and stood by the window. Below, people hurried through their routines, unaware of the negotiations that had just failed. She felt no rush of triumph, only a settling calm. She had not refused them out of anger. She had refused because returning would mean pretending the truth could be undone. Power did not live in access badges or boardroom chairs. It lived in the ability to say no when the price was not worth the cost. They had believed firing her ended her relevance. Instead, it clarified it. Lena turned away from the window, already thinking ahead. They would not stop here. Desperation had a way of widening the field. And somewhere beyond the reach of apology and salary adjustments, another conversation was waiting to begin. The announcement hit the press before the system was ready to lie. They claimed it was fixed. The headline moved fast, cleaner than the truth. Stability restored, confidence reaffirmed, leadership decisive. Photos followed, carefully chosen, showing smiling executives beneath glass and light, hands mid-gesture as if the crisis had never happened. Inside the building, applause was encouraged. Relief was rehearsed. The chief executive stood before his board that morning with a practiced calm, voice clipped, shoulders squared. He spoke of resilience, of redundancy layers, of a temporary authorization issue now fully resolved. He credited his operations team, praised their speed, their loyalty. The room wanted to believe him. Directors nodded. Legal relaxed its grip. Phones stopped vibrating quite so violently. For a few hours, the illusion held. Somewhere deep in the system, a clock kept counting. Engineers returned to their desks cautiously. Dashboards flickered back to life, limited but responsive enough to sell the story. Clients were reassured with careful language. Partners were told this was routine. Routine was a performance. The chief executive allowed himself a breath. He smiled for the cameras again, this time with more confidence. He believed he had outpaced the problem. He believed the worst had passed. It had not. Less than a day later, at precisely 9:17 in the morning, the system collapsed again. Not partially, not politely, completely. Screens went dark across departments. Demo environments froze. Client sandboxes failed. Internal tools refused to load. The same message returned, unembellished and merciless. Authorization invalid. Panic did not creep in this time. It slammed the doors open. On the operations floor, voices rose. Someone swore. Someone else stared at their screen as if it had betrayed them personally. A senior engineer slammed his palm against the desk and demanded to know who had authorized the patch. No one answered. In the executive wing, the chief executive shouted for answers that did not exist. He accused teams of sabotage, of incompetence, of missing steps. His voice echoed off glass walls, loud enough to betray fear. Down the hall, a director quietly closed the door to a conference room and called legal. This time, reporters did not wait for statements. The story wrote itself. The same platform that had supposedly been restored had failed again, harder and faster than before. Questions sharpened, trust evaporated. In a boardroom that had already heard too many reassurances, patience snapped. "Show us proof," someone demanded. Logs were pulled, systems were traced, the temporary fix unraveled under scrutiny. It had never been a restoration. It was a facade, a demonstration shell with no legal authority behind it. Someone finally said what everyone was thinking. This was theater. The words landed like a verdict. The chief executive felt the room turn against him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His certainty collapsed inward. Folding under the weight of exposure, he had mistaken appearance for control, volume for authority. Across the city, Lena watched the news update on her screen. She did not smile. She did not lean forward. She had known this would happen. The system was not malfunctioning. It was enforcing structure. It was doing what it had been designed to do when handled by people who did not belong inside it. Her phone lit up with messages again. Engineers this time. Short, frantic, unfiltered. They cannot access anything. They are blaming everyone. They do not know what they broke. She read them once, then set the phone aside. For the first time, the chaos was not hers to carry. Back at headquarters, the board convened an emergency session. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, investors called in, no longer patient, no longer polite. Someone demanded accountability, someone else demanded a solution. All eyes turned eventually to the empty chair. The absence spoke louder than any argument. The chief executive stood alone near the wall, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. He understood now what he had dismissed before. The system did not belong to him. It never had. As the meeting dissolved into fragments, a single decision emerged, inevitable and unspoken. They would have to call her, not with offers, not with flattery, with necessity. In her apartment, Lena closed the window and let the city noise fall away. She felt no rush of triumph, only a steady clarity. They had tried to outrun consequence with confidence and spectacle. They had failed. And now, with the illusion stripped bare, the truth stood where it always had, waiting. They did not ask her to come back. They asked her to come upstairs. The call came without ceremony, stripped of warmth, urgency laid bare beneath formality. The board wanted a meeting, immediately. Not in the usual conference rooms, in the executive chamber, the place reserved for decisions that could not be undone. Lena arrived early. The building felt different now, quieter, heavier. Employees avoided eye contact, pretending to be absorbed in screens that no longer trusted them. Whispers followed her through the corridors, then fell away. She walked with an even pace, shoulders relaxed, hands steady. Not because she was calm by nature, but because she had already crossed the threshold they were only now approaching. Inside the chamber, the air was brittle. Directors sat rigidly along the table, faces drawn, voices muted before they even spoke. Legal folders lay open like shields. Phones rested face down as if sound itself had become dangerous. Near the wall stood the chief executive, no longer at the head, posture stiff, jaw set tight enough to ache. He did not meet her eyes. The chair at the center waited. The chairman cleared his throat, thanked her for coming. Spoke carefully about circumstances, about urgency, about the need to discuss a path forward. Each word measured, each pause heavy with what was not being said. Lena placed her folder on the table. The sound was soft, final. "I am not here to discuss returning," she said. The room shifted. A director leaned forward, surprised. Someone from legal opened their mouth, then closed it. This was not the script they had prepared. She continued, voice level. "I will not restore access. I will not resume oversight. I will not re-enter a structure that chose spectacle over understanding." Silence pressed in. The chief executive finally spoke, sharp and defensive. "You do not have the authority." Lena did not look at him. She slid a document across the table instead. Then another, then another. Pages filled with signatures, approvals, oversight acknowledgments, their handwriting, their dates, their assumptions. Authority, she said quietly, is not declared. It is documented. As the papers were read, faces changed. Lines tightened, eyes widened, then narrowed. Someone exhaled slowly, as if releasing a held breath they had not known they were carrying. The truth assembled itself without drama. Her dismissal had not removed control, it had transferred it completely legally, irrevocably. The chairman's voice faltered. "What are you proposing?" Lena leaned back slightly, folding her hands. "I am not proposing," she said. "I am concluding." The word landed hard. "I will sell the system." A murmur rippled through the room, sharp and involuntary. One director dropped a pen. Another stared at her as if recalculating everything he believed he knew about leverage. The chief executive stepped forward, anger breaking through restraint. "You cannot sell what belongs to us." She met his eyes then, calm, unmoved. "It never did." The room went still. She spoke again, slower now, allowing the weight to settle. "You are not losing a tool. You are losing the illusion that you ever owned it. What happens next is not a negotiation. It is an outcome." The chairman looked down at the table, then back up. His voice was quieter when he spoke. "To whom?" Lena did not answer immediately. She thought of the cafe, the tablet sliding across the table. The question she had been asked, finally asked the right way. "Who do you want the system to work for?" "To someone who understands it," she said. No name was needed. The meeting dissolved after that, not with shouting, not with gavel strikes, with resignation, with the slow realization that leverage had already changed hands. As Lena stood to leave, no one stopped her. In the hallway outside, the building breathed again, though not with relief, with inevitability. Behind her, the chief executive remained by the wall, smaller now, stripped of the posture that once made him loud. He understood, too late, that removing her had not weakened the system. It had revealed it. Lena stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on a room that no longer had power over her. For the first time, the ending was not being written by those who spoke the most. It was being written by the one who had built the foundation and finally chose where it would stand. The number on the contract did not feel real when she first saw it. It felt like a test. The conference room at the rival headquarters was quieter than she expected. No grand table, no glass walls designed to intimidate, just clean lines, muted colors, and the soft hum of a building that knew exactly what it was doing. The kind of place that did not need to announce power because it already understood it. Lena sat alone on one side of the table. Across from her, executives waited without posturing. They did not rush her. They did not fill the silence. One of them slid a folder forward, stopping short of her reach, as if to say the choice was hers, even now. She opened it slowly. The figure stared back at her in ink so crisp it almost looked artificial. $1.2 billion, written out in full. No abbreviations, no theatrics, just wait. For a moment, the room disappeared. She saw long nights hunched over terminals while others slept. She felt the ache of deadlines carried alone. She remembered the boardroom where she had been dismissed as if value could be erased with a sentence. All of it condensed into that single number. Across the table, someone cleared their throat, not impatiently. Carefully, they spoke of acquisition, of integration, of future growth, of markets unlocked and efficiencies gained. Familiar language, confident, controlled. Lena listened without reacting. Money was never the hard part. Power rarely announces itself through numbers. It hides in terms, in control, in who decides what happens after the check clears. When the room paused, waiting for her response, she closed the folder. "There is a condition," she said. No surprise crossed their faces. If anything, there was relief. She reached into her bag and placed a single page on the table. Clean, precise, written in her hand. "The system will be sold," she continued, "but I will not disappear with it. I will serve as its advisory architect. Not an employee, not a figurehead, a guardian. Final authority over how the technology is deployed and who it serves." Silence followed. Not the brittle silence of resistance, the thoughtful silence of recalculation. She went on, "It will not be used to manipulate supply chains at the expense of people who cannot defend themselves. It will not be weaponized for short-term optics. It will not be stripped down and repackaged until its purpose is unrecognizable." Across from her, one executive leaned back, studying her. Another exchanged a glance with legal pens hovered. Minds moved. This was not the condition they expected. They had assumed control came with ownership. They were wrong. Finally, the man who had first reached out to her spoke. His voice was calm, almost impressed. "You are protecting it even after you let it go." Lena nodded once. "I am protecting what I built." The decision did not take long after that. When the revised contract returned to the table, the number had not changed. The conditions were embedded, airtight, unavoidable. Authority preserved where it mattered. She signed her name without hesitation. As the pen lifted from the page, something loosened in her chest. Not excitement, not triumph, release. The money would arrive soon enough. It would redraw maps, open doors, silence doubts. But it was not the victory. The victory was walking out of that room with her work intact and her voice still attached to it. Across the city, in a building that had once believed itself untouchable, the consequences were still unfolding. Stock prices shifted. Calls went unanswered. A former chief executive sat alone in an office that no longer felt like his, staring at a future he could not control. Lena did not think about him. She stepped into the daylight outside the rival headquarters, contract secured, shoulders light. The city moved around her, unaware of the quiet transfer that had just taken place. They had tried to erase her. Instead, they had taught her the value of choosing her terms. For the first time since the system began, it belonged exactly where it should have been all along, in the hands of the one who understood its weight. The collapse did not announce itself with a single sound. It arrived as silence. Markets opened to numbers that refused to recover. Screens refreshed. Analysts paused mid-sentence. A company that once filled rooms with confidence now struggled to explain itself. Shares slid. Calls went unanswered. Partners hesitated, then pulled back entirely. 14 days. That was all it took. Inside the headquarters that had once celebrated decisiveness, desks emptied quietly, conversations softened, eyes avoided one another. The architecture that had held everything together was gone, and without it, authority felt hollow. In a small press room washed in harsh light, a man sat off to the side while cameras focused elsewhere. His suit no longer fit the moment. The tie was loose. The posture collapsed inward. He stared at the floor as statements were read that did not include his name. Once, he had believed power lived in certainty, in the ability to end a career with a sentence, in the comfort of knowing the room would follow. Now the room had moved on. Questions came faster than answers. Who approved this? Who missed the clause? Who failed to read the line that mattered most? No one volunteered. Across town, in a different building with quieter corridors, Lena stood just beyond the edge of the spotlight. She watched the same headlines scroll past without reaction. Collapse. Mismanagement. Oversight failures. None of it surprised her. She did not feel victorious. Victory implies a contest. What she felt was resolution. Years of work had not been erased. They had been redirected. The system she built no longer answered to voices that did not understand it. It moved forward under guard, not noise. When she finally stepped before the cameras, the room shifted. Flashbulbs ignited. Reporters called her name. Microphones reached forward, eager to capture a reaction, a quote sharp enough to headline the aftermath. She stood still. The contract rested on the podium in front of her, unremarkable in appearance, immense in consequence. Her posture was steady, her expression unreadable. Someone asked if this felt like revenge. She did not answer immediately. She thought of the boardroom where her career had supposedly ended. The single word she had offered then understood, the silence that followed, the mistake they never realized they were making. When she spoke now, her voice was calm, almost gentle. This was never about revenge, she said. It was about ownership. A murmur rippled through the room. She continued, not louder but clearer. Too often, we confuse titles with value, visibility with control, loudness with leadership. The truth is quieter. It lives in preparation, in reading what others skim, in building something so well that it knows who belongs inside it. She paused. I did not take anything from them. I simply chose where my work would continue. The cameras kept rolling. Somewhere else, former executives watched from behind screens, recognizing too late the difference between holding power and borrowing it. Lena stepped away from the podium without ceremony. No raised fist, no dramatic exit, just a measured turn and a walk into daylight. The city received her without fanfare. People passed by unaware of the transfer that had just reshaped an industry. Coffee shops filled, traffic moved, life continued. That was the point. Power does not need an audience to exist. It needs clarity. In the quiet that followed, one truth settled into place. The greatest reversal is not shouting when you are dismissed. It is standing tall when you are underestimated. It is letting others believe they have won while you finish building the ending. If this journey stirred something in you, if you have ever been pushed aside, overlooked, or told your work did not matter, remember this. Your worth is not decided in someone else's boardroom. It is defined by what you choose to protect and where you choose to take it next. Tell me which moment stayed with you the longest: the silence, the collapse, or the choice at the end. Share your thoughts below, and if this story resonated, take a moment to like it and subscribe. The next chapter might be closer to your own story than you think.